Okay, that looks better.
Okay. And recording.
Yep.
And we're live, Chair Reimer.
I would like to call the Committee of the Whole Budget meeting of September 13th, 2023 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Reimer, Councillor and Chair of the Budget Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom, and the members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all of our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Roll call this evening. We have all of council in attendance, and we have confirmed quorum. We also have lots of staff joining us this evening, so thank you for being here as well. Number 3 on our agenda, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none. Number 4 of their statutory public meetings. We do not have any statutory public meetings. Number 5, delegations. We have no delegations. Moving along, number 6, our consent agenda. We have no consent agenda items this evening. And right in number 7, regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, which is a presentation provided by the Ad Hoc Capital Financing Debt Review Committee regarding capital financing debt review recommendations. Our CEO and Treasurer will be providing a presentation. Mike and Charlotte, please go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening to you and to members of council. I am going to be providing some opening comments, and I think I'm going to do it in the way that speaks, I think, to both presentations this evening. You have 2 very important topics on the agenda this evening. One is around our Ad Hoc Capital Financing Debt Review Committee and the recommendations associated to that. And the other one is an introduction into our 2024 budget process. Both of these topics are integral, and I think in a lot of ways they are interrelated, specifically when they speak to our financial well-being and to the financial well-being of our residents and the citizens that call Lincoln home. As members of council know, financial sustainability and keeping costs in line are always top of mind for me, our corporate leadership team, and the public sector. I know they are for you, because every time I am sitting with you, we are having these types of conversations. We recognize that we operate with taxpayers' money that our hardworking residents earn and use to support their families and loved ones. That is why we always strive to do more with less, ensuring our services and programming is the best we can deliver without overburdening our residents with unreasonable taxes. Over the past year, we have seen things and we have spoken about a rise in interest rates, costs soaring, and budgets stretched thin. The financial pressures that many families across Lincoln and the province are seeing is not unique, and it is something we are seeing at an operational level here at the Town of Lincoln as well. And it's something that's driving our day-to-day work here at Town Hall. That's why I've asked staff to look at where we can be more efficient with taxpayer dollars, where we can reduce duplication, and where we can minimize financial impacts. And I think we're doing a good job with that. However, this high interest rate and high inflationary environment is also affecting us. I promise you, we will present you with a budget plan that is highly scrutinized, and tonight's the kickoff to that, in line with council priorities, and one that minimizes as much as possible any tax increases. As for the ad hoc committee, we spent nearly 30 hours into meeting and determining a path forward on debt. It was eye-opening, I think, for the committee, and the committee members will be able to speak to that when we finish our presentation. I do want to emphasize, while public sector debt is not a bad thing, I do agree that we must keep debt in line with revenues, knowing that we cannot burden the next generations with the decisions of today. I'm very confident that the recommendations of the committee before you this evening, that Charlotte and I will take you through, put us in a good position moving forward. While in a perfect world, I would tell you we'd have money in the bank to undertake every capital project we want. Unfortunately, that's not a reality for any government. And so we must borrow to build our communities for today, for tomorrow, and for years down the road. While not every resident or stakeholder group will be happy with the resulting recommendations, and I'll highlight again, it took us 30 hours to get to where we are today. I'm sure there are opposing views, but at the end of the day, we move forward confident in the decision that's before you. As always, I look forward to the discussion this evening. And moving on, what we will be discussing this evening as it relates to the ad hoc debt review committee is long-term borrowing, a little bit of a background on debt and the debt limit and how those numbers are realized. We also told you we would come back to you with a prioritization of capital projects and ultimately the recommendations before you that you've reviewed as it relates to debt. Next slide. So a little bit of a background. Lincoln's experienced significant growth. I think I've been saying this for the last 4 or 5 budgets. We, as a result of that growth and as a result of playing catch up on projects that over the last decade or 2 decades weren't necessarily done at the time, and decisions were made as to when or how those projects would be taken on. We've invested in numerous capital projects, everything from parks to facilities to recreation centers, and most of them have been funded by development charge dollars. I've highlighted a few there for you: Rotary Park, Jordan Village, the Camden Fire Station, Prokich Park, and roads like Rittenhouse and Drake Avenue. Oftentimes when we talk about debt, and we spent a lot of time talking about the different forms, rate supported debt, tax levy supported debt, and development charge supported debt. So focusing a little bit on development charge supported debt, because it's really the driver of a number of conversations. Development charge collections are dependent on the timing of development. And I think as we've seen, the government has tried to ensure that things are moving quicker, but issues at play globally, have slowed things down for us. We've seen construction price increases, unprecedented inflation. So all this has caused the pressure not only on the industry and what we're seeing, but also on our own reserve funds and what we're doing. On April 24th of this year, Council established an ad hoc capital financing and debt review committee to report back on a few things. Prioritization themes for our capital program. What should those borrowing or debt limits be moving forward? And out of those will come a debt policy, and then a review of project lists and updated project prioritization, which again we'll speak to as we go into the 2024 budget. So probably the easiest conversation this evening, or at least I hope to be the easiest conversation this evening, is how we're going to prioritize things moving forward on capital. You'll see 1 and 2 and then a line underneath, and then 3, 4, and 5. The top 2 are critical. In a lot of ways, these are things we can't not do. And I think that's the easiest way to characterize this. Health and safety, these are things we need to do. Things happen, we need to address them. When the risk or the safety of our community is on the ground and we need to address things, that's what we're doing. There's also a number of legislated or legal obligations that we have around asset obligations. If we think about our water, if we think about structurally things that may or may not require us addressing them, the structural integrity of things within our community. Those are things that we need to absolutely address. And so the reason I've highlighted, I think that, and put a line underneath it is really to tell members of council that our focus will be there. Our focus on the 2024 capital program really is going to be on those top 2 things. Of course, strategic growth related investment is important. Our community lens and council priorities always at the forefront of what we're doing. Grant opportunities and partnerships are also important. But if I look at the immediate needs within our capital program, I think what you're going to see is those top two areas are going to take the lion's share of available dollars. And so, no, so that's it. So Charlotte, you're next, right? You got ahead of me.
Yeah, sorry. All right. So as a background, some of the conversation that started this was the debt limit. So let's talk a bit about what that debt limit means and how it's calculated. So the debt limit is debt as a percentage of what's called own source revenues as calculated as per the Municipal Act. And the town's limit, like all municipalities in Ontario, is 25% of own source revenues as established by the province. Own source revenues include items like property taxes, water and wastewater rates, and user fees. It excludes items such as grants, development charges, which we refer to as DCs, and proceeds on disposal of property. So essentially, it's focusing on the items that are under the control of the municipality. DC collections are excluded from own source revenues to help reduce risk because the timing of collection is outside of the control of the municipality. The province of Ontario has also impacted DC collections through Bill 23. Debt costs and annual costs of long-term commitments include principal and interest on all debt, including DC debt, but excluding tile drain loans. It also includes long-term commitments to hospitals and universities. So it's important just to recap those 2 points. The development charge collections are excluded from the revenues, but the debt payments on development charges are included in the debt calculation. The debt limit for each year is always based on the most recently submitted FIR at the time it is calculated. So the 2023 debt limit is based on the town's 2021 FIR and the revenue levels in that year. The limit must be updated for council by the treasurer based on information that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs would not have, such as debt that is not yet issued or additional projects that have been approved with debt funding that are not yet complete. There is a time lag between project approval by council with debt funding and the time that the debt is taken out. And the debt limit today is based on the calculation as if all of the projects have been completed and all of the debt has been taken out with full year principal and interest payments. The treasurer's updated calculation is based on some assumptions and estimates concerning interest rates and timing of debt, but it is a good approximation. To provide a little bit of additional context and information, at the end of 2023, the town will have, and I should have mentioned in the sentence, it's long-term debt outstanding of approximately $25.7 million. This is accumulated long-term borrowing over the past 15 years. It includes items like fire and dump trucks, Fire Station Number 2, the Fleming Center, large road projects like Drake Avenue, Rittenhouse Road, and the Jordan Village improvements, as well as various water main, wastewater, and waterworks and capital requirements. Based on the 2023 budget, estimated own source revenues will be approximately $38.7 million for the 2023 year. Now, these own source revenues change and they tend to grow yearly because we have additional costs, we have growth in the municipality, and so revenues tend to trend upward. Revenues within the control of the municipality are what's included here, excluding items like grants and DCs. Our estimated debt payments, principal and interest on existing 2023 debt is going to be approximately $1.17 million. And so this means that right now, the estimate is that in our 2023 FIR, assuming all other things are held equal, debt as a percentage of own source revenues is projected to be approximately 3%. In addition to the debt outstanding at the end of 2023, Council has approved additional capital projects with debt funding. This amount is approximately $55 million. Most of these are multi-year projects, and some of those larger projects include the following as listed below. And of note, the majority are being funded from development charge dollars, or what we consider development charge incurred debt. So the development-driven and development-related projects include the Prudhome's water main for $16 million, Lincoln Avenue reconstruction for $8.7 million, Ontario Street sanitary sewer for $7 million, Green Lane Phase 1, $4.8 million, and Aberdeen and Hillside Slope stabilization and reconstruction for $4 million. We also have other priority projects that are either sort of compelled by grants or cost avoidance. And one example of that is the Lakeshore Roads and Shoreline Protection Project for $6.4 million. Some of these projects will not be complete until 2025. When they are all complete and the debt is taken out, the debt repayment amount will be approximately $5.5 million annually. This is estimated at 14.2% of 2023 own source revenues. If all of this was taken this year, which it won't be, therefore we're projecting to be closer to 11% at the time of issuance, assuming revenue trends continue in 2024 and 2025. When all of the projects are complete and debt issuance occurs, funding sources will be approximately half from DCs. So 48% of our debt will be funded from development charges, 32% from the tax levy, and 20% from water and sanitary sewer rates. This graph is the projection of debt as a percentage of own source revenues in the financial statements and the FIR in the next few years, based on several assumptions, including the timing of debenture and continued increased revenues of 6 to 8% per year in the short-term horizon due to growth and other factors. So you can see at the very top, the provincial repayment limit is 25%. The red line in the middle, slightly lower than the middle, is the internal debt limit of 10%. The blue line at the very bottom is the existing debt. So the debt that's outstanding as of the time that we had our committee meetings. And so it's around 2.3, 2.2%. You might wonder why that's different than the 3% I said earlier. That's because we have some debentures that are being issued in the next month or two. And then the green line that's peaking slightly above the red line is the existing and approved debt. So all the things that are still coming down the pipe later on in the future. So let's talk about the recommendation on the debt limits. The ad hoc committee reviewed the calculations and discussed the limits and definitions in depth. We talked about numerous options, including but not limited to prepayment of DCs, capital program levy levels, capital program projects, year over year, and other issues that allow us to ensure continued financial sustainability. As an illustration, each $1 million in debt approved by the municipality equals debt payments of approximately $67,000 per year and is approximately 0.2% of own source revenues, depending on interest rates at time of issuance and the term of the debenture. The committee is recommending an overall limit of 15% of own source revenues that be set with a number of other guidelines as found on the following slide. The first recommendation is a total debt limit from 2023 to 2028 of 15%, from 2029 to 2033 of 12%, and from 2034 onward of 10%. It's important to understand that this is so that when you think about that graph that we looked at the last slide, so that we can map out what that's going to look like in the future. Where are we hoping to head for? What would we like to see down the road in the future? And so it's not necessarily setting it in stone in future years, but it's to give us a goal that we're heading towards in the future. The second recommendation is tax levy and rate supported portions of the overall debt will not exceed 10% of own source revenue. So that's going to exclude the DC debt. and anything else that's sort of external that's funded by a different source that's been excluded. The third recommendation is that for obligatory reserve supported debt, such as the DC debt or parkland dedication cash in lieu, a target for debt payments not to exceed 50% of the 5-year average of obligatory reserve collection adjusted for anomalies. And what we're referring to there in terms of anomalies is if we have a big spike in one year or a big drop in one year because of some, we had a change due to COVID, we would exclude that from that analysis because it's not really representative of the average. Number 4, that staff complete an annual report to council on proposed debt, long-term borrowing, and revenue projections, reserve balances, debt-related financial indicators, timing of work, and debt issuance as part of the budget process. And the 5th recommendation is that should any proposed project or overall proposed yearly budget push the town of Lincoln above the aforementioned limits, that a report first be brought to council for a decision to see the impact prior to any project approval. So the third objective for the committee was the draft debt policy. Upon approval by council of the updated debt limit, staff will draft an updated policy for debt and capital financing utilizing the parameters approved. And 4th, the review of the project list and updated project prioritization. Upon approval by council of the updated debt limit and capital project prioritization themes, staff will bring forward a recommended 10-year capital forecast aligned to the direction of council. This will be provided to council as part of the 2024 capital budget book for review and discussion through the budget process.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Mr. CEO, that's a great summary of our ad hoc committee time together. Lots of detail there, so thank you very much for that. Members of council, do you have any questions to that report? Councilor Miklik, please go ahead.
Just the ball is going to get rolling, so I'll get the ball rolling. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that report, and thank you to the ad hoc committee for your work with coming up with these recommendations. Question I have, why do municipalities impose self-targeted debt limits? If a municipality needs to spend what they need to spend, why wouldn't a municipality just spend what they have to spend? Why are these limits set in place for this council and for possibly future councils?
Charlotte? Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to the councillor. I mean, it would be hard for me to answer on behalf of all the municipalities. If you asked why I think they would do that, it is a risk management strategy. So I think the thinking is probably, what if an emergency happens? We have 25%. What if a situation occurs and we need that room? They're leaving that buffer room in the event of an emergency. And also it's, I think because even sometimes in your personal life, you don't always want to borrow everything that the bank tells you can borrow. You want to give yourself a little bit of leeway because, maybe you want to take a vacation or whatever it is that your discretionary spending is. So I think it's a little bit of a risk management as well as a way of leaving yourself some additional room so that you're not using up a lot of your operating budget room on debt payments every year.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you very much for that. So this it's like a self-regulating. It's like a throttle. It's like to minimize the amount of debt a current council can take on without impacting the future. Now that's how I'm hearing that.
Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. In a sense, I would say, yeah, it's not just the throttle. It is sort of, I would call it a buffer. So I would call it a way of giving yourself a buffer so that if you do need a little more, if you do have other expenses that you want to incur, you would have room to do so. But maybe it's because I'm not very mechanical and I don't know a lot about throttles, so
That's
I'll say buffer.
Bit of an automotive analogy. So now, you know, it's real frustrating for me. You know, I'm a conservative. I'm not afraid to spend money. Don't kid yourself. I'm not afraid to spend money. What I am afraid to do is to spend money that we don't necessarily have, that we have to borrow or acquire. So that's where I'm a little bit perhaps cautious. I take more of a cautious approach to that. But what happens? So we are counting on DC charges of future anticipated DC charges to finance 48% of our debt. Times are fluid. Times are nothing's been guaranteed, as we're finding out this past year. What happens if that money's not there? That anticipated 48% revenue that we're hoping for down the road doesn't come to fruition.
Charlotte, go ahead.
Through you, Chair, to the counselor. I mean, that is a big question. So I guess there are a few things I could say to that. First of all, you do have what is currently in your DC reserve fund. So if you have a year when your debt payments for DCs exceed the amount you're collecting in that year, you would dip into the reserve fund. So that's part of the answer. I would say another part of it is earlier in the presentation, we also talked about the fact that the DC revenues are excluded from the revenue that's being used to derive the limit. So I think the province, in a sense, has put a little bit of a risk management framework in there by excluding those revenues. But if for some reason you went below everything you collect and below everything in your DC reserve fund, then we would have to fund it from the tax levy.
And I guess that's what I'm afraid of. I'm aware that it's not that the DC revenues are not included in our FER calculation, but we are relying on them to finance this debt that we're taking on, and that's what is making me nervous, or cautious. Let's use the word caution. And when I look at that one chart or that one page where currently we're paying 1 point something in interest payments, and that's proposed to jump over 5. Well, like that to me sounds like interest money that we're using to borrow that could build a park. That's like a significant amount of money that could be used to finance or to build things in the future, as opposed to just servicing debt. So this is where, my thanks to the ad hoc committee. I'm extremely cautious with this, and I'm not afraid to spend money. I'm just afraid to spend money that we don't have in our back pocket, or that I can peel off out of a wallet. So those are my 2 questions just for now to start. So I'll chime in.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Charlotte. Go ahead,
Through
Charlotte.
you, Chair, I'm not sure whether the CAO wants to jump in there as well, but I did want to just add the 1.17 million that I spoke about earlier. That's principal and interest. And so is the 5.5 million. So I just want to make sure that's clear, because our budget is on a cash basis.
Yeah.
So when we do this analysis, when we prepare a budget, we plan for all the cash that has to go out the door. So that's principal and interest included. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear. And I do understand what you're saying. From my perspective, I think, it is always a balancing act. So it's a balancing act when we're looking at that capital forecast. We're planning for the future. We're looking at everything we want to do. And sometimes we can't do everything this year with the money that we have available, or sometimes we think that future taxpayers should be contributing towards the cost of a project. So there can be reasons that a council would decide to take out debt, but I certainly understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that.
That through you, Chair, Robert, through you. Now, I thank you for that clarification, because I thought that was interest payments and not principal, not P&I. So thank you for that clarification, because that's a significant amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Njima, please go ahead.
Through you, Chair,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, CEO. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, I apologize, Councillor Regima. Through you, Chair. I mean, maybe just a couple of comments. I think the Councillor Mikulic's question around why have a debt management policy is a good one, and maybe a few comments to add to what Charlotte said. I think when we look at debt management, first and foremost, I would say any responsible administration and council should be looking at debt and should be looking at its finances. And I know you take those things seriously. So what are some of the other reasons we would utilize or have a policy or have limits? And I know the councillor and I have spoken numerous times. There are municipalities that don't have limits. There are those that exceed the limits that we've got in front of you and that we're at, and there are those that are below those limits. When you have 400 municipalities all at different points in their growth, in different locations, you're going to get that. But establishing financial guidelines like the ones we have in front of you are important. They allow long-term financial sustainability and flexibility. And that flexibility, I think, is key. You mentioned some of the emergencies that happen. We want to have some flexibility if things happen. We want to limit, though, the financial vulnerability. And I think that's what Charlotte is I think, highlighting for you. As well, it's not just about the here and now and the today. It is about integrating our long-term planning, both from a financial perspective as well as a infrastructure perspective. And so, I would add those, and maybe the last one. I mean, there's just statutory requirements that we have as municipalities. There is a reason the province has set a limit. Their limit is 25%. But again, as we look to others, there are best practices in terms of that 10 to 15% range, where a number of municipalities, especially those growth municipalities like ours, are at. And I think those are also areas or reasons or rationale why we brought this sort of policy statement forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thanks, Mike. Councillor Njima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate all the work that the committee did. I think this is great. I think at least for this term of council, we'll be able to look at the decisions that we made tonight and have a look at this policy, because I know the year goes by fast, but you can still kind of sometimes forget what you talked about a year ago at budget time again. So we'll have this policy to be able to refer back to. These are our guidelines. I think it's a great idea, and I appreciate all the hard work of the committee. I've heard a little bit of concern about this tying the hands of future councils when you're talking about beyond 2028. So I know we don't have the draft policy in our hand yet, but when we do, my suggestion would be that it be worded such that this is the council's decision up until 2026, I believe that's the end of this term. And that beyond that, it's a recommendation to implement this council's strategy, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next term. So we're making decisions for ourselves for this term. And then, as Charlotte said, there's a long-term vision attached to this. And we're recommending to future councils in order to implement this vision, this strategy. This is how we see it going in years beyond, but it's up to the future council to decide how it's done. So that's a question slash suggestion. And I like the prioritization theme. I think that's great. So I'm wondering, when these capital projects come forward, is the plan to sort of have a breakdown of how each project meets those prioritization themes as we look at each project during the budget process?
Okay, so thank you, Councillor Njima. So there's sort of 1.5s there. Mr. CEO, could you address the first one? And,
sure,
and Charlotte the second? Great,
why don't I start, and if I delve into the second, you can pull me back, Chair. I think on the first one, Councillor, I would say, I've heard the concern around not binding future councils, and I think, though, the decisions we make, I've often said to you, we make a lot of generational decisions, capital projects that stretch over 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years, by virtue of their duration, bind future councils. And so we are doing that already, but I absolutely understand and agree that we should be looking at all our policies, and they should be reviewed on a regular basis. And so whether that happen every term of council depending on the policy. I think that's an appropriate way forward. We would do that anyways. I think the natural course of us reporting back to members of council on a yearly basis, you will understand debt limits and capital financing far more than you probably understand any other things, and far more than you've probably understood it to date, by virtue of the fact that our new policy will have us reporting back on a yearly basis. But absolutely noted that future councils, by virtue of a majority, can choose to make different decisions. I think staff understand that, and that's noted. And if we need to incorporate that known fact into a policy when we come back, we can absolutely do that. On the second piece, before I turn it over to Charlotte, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I'll say we agree with you wholeheartedly, and I see Charlotte nodding, so maybe I'll hand it off to her. She's ready to, I think, respond to this one.
No, I was thinking that you were doing a great job through you, Chair.
ahead,
No, I agree. We can definitely present it in that lens. I mean, I think staff staff are always looking through those health and safety and legislated lenses. We're going to talk about the budget presentation after this and talk about what we go through, but we certainly can apply that lens to the way that the capital budget comes forward and make sure we highlight those things for you.
Yeah, thank you. Because if these are our priorities in that list, then it would be very helpful as we're going through the process to see exactly what your opinion on how each project does meet 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could, just on that last comment,
Go ahead, Mike.
I suspect the lion's share of our budget, though, will really focus on those first two. I think there's always, opportunities for us to look at those other pieces. But if I think about just some of the realities that we're facing, that we've had a long conversation on as chair and vice chair of budget, but that you've heard, all members of council have heard us highlight. Projects cost a lot more, inflation's there, skilled labor, cost of materials. That means we're not going to be able to do as many projects and still stay within our limits and present you a budget that I think is appropriate and digestible. And so those first two key pieces around health and safety and the legislated mandated probably take the lion's share of the projects. However, there may be other projects, and then we will absolutely, I think, in years moving forward, and in our long-term capital planning, incorporate all of those, Councillor Rajima, into how we prioritize things moving forward.
Thanks, Mr. CEO. Thanks, Councillor Njima. On next to Councillor Pachariva. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Reimer. And I'm not very mechanical either, Charlotte, but I think the 10% rate is more of a governor, right? It won't allow you to go above it, right? So the old go-kart that you had to kind of go back with the screwdriver and twist it to make you go faster. So, and again, too, I appreciate all the work that the committee and staff has gone on this, and would kind of echo Councillor Rajima's comments that I like the outlook, but that, make a recommendation that it should be reviewed at the beginning of each term of council, and let the council of the day set that, because something might come up that you need to hold it at 15 or 12, and let them decide based on, the events of that time and what's happening. So that would be my comment. And then, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but your priorities, we listed the top two, health and safety and regulatory ones. And this kind of dovetailed into presentation I saw today. On CH, they had their mayor's talk, and the mayor from Burlington, Marianne Mead Ward, was on. And they have the strong mayor powers. So she's going to be delivering the budget this year, not staff. But what they're doing is they're doing a must-have, which sounds like what we're doing with the 1 and 2. And then the 3, 4, 5 becomes, okay, well, this is, say you're at, a percentage. And if you want these added in, this is the result. So then maybe it becomes a positive spin on a budget where we all together decide based on our priorities what we should add and what we shouldn't, rather than a negative one that we've experienced where, okay, we got to cut something, right? We saw it the other night, with the presentation, or the motion that Councillor Bernay and I brought forward. And if Councillor Russell said it once, he said it 3 times about incentivizing residents to increase the tree canopy. Well, we had incentivized them through a program of giving them trees, and that didn't fly. So I think, if we all get together on those things and build them and work out the rationale behind it and kind of connect the dots, then I think it's a better process. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Charlotte and CAO.
Thank you, Councillor. Charlotte, you want to go first?
Through you, Chair, I was going to ask if the CAO wanted to
I
setting
could
the
tell
direction,
he was
but
still mulling over, and you have thoughts. I could see it in your eyes.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility for sure. If that's the direction that council wants us to take, I mean, we can certainly try to present the budget to you in the way that you would like us to. I think as he's mentioned, there are a lot of requirements in the budget. There are a lot of things that are outside of our control. And so as we've been discussing and starting to review things, I think that's sort of been our focus to date, is on the things that are legislated, the things that are mandated, the health and safety requirements, inflation, and sort of those unavoidable things that we are looking at in terms of the budget. But in terms of the rest, I'm going to turn it over to the CAO, if you don't mind, Chair, to talk about the direction.
Go ahead, Mike.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I mean, councillor, I think, we're always looking at budget and trying to figure out, are there better ways for us to bring things forward? This leads me to, what I often call this misnomer of needs versus wants, which I don't think actually exists. I think there are varying degrees of needs. Not a popular comment, but when I talk about roads at a certain service level are not a actual need. They are things that as council, as staff, we decide here's the service level we want. And I could say that about grass cutting. I could say that about ice rates. I could say that about library services and a lot of other things. And this is what we deliver. When you look at work that KPMG and Deloitte and others do around service delivery reviews, they don't use words like needs and wants. They talk about what is legislated and mandated, things I can't touch. Things like insurance. I can't come to you and say insurance rates have gone up by 40% and I want to cut insurance. I don't want to have insurance. From a risk management perspective, I can't do it. It's illegal. Then there are those other buckets around, the traditional things communities provide. And the traditional things communities provide are things like library services and arenas. Do we need to provide them? Does the Municipal Act say so? No, it doesn't. And then there's these other nice to haves, I think, as often people like to categorize them, the programs that either make us money or the programs that create community spirit. Again, not necessary. So anytime we're in front of you, we're bringing you a list of needs, but they're varying needs. If you said to me, we want to invest in this area and not upgrade our roads to this certain level, then we can do that because, again, there isn't a legislative framework other than if we dip down below a minimum standard or a minimum service level. So I think, you're going to hear me maybe more talk about and try to explain, because I often hear at budget time, this needs versus wants conversation. And again, for me, I think it is a little bit of a misnomer. They're varying degrees of needs, and that's what we put in front of you. And I think it's important to put those things in front of you. So do we want to have a list of must-haves and nice-to-haves? Again, I think that sets us up for pitting one versus the other. And I would say anything that we're bringing before you as staff are things we believe need to be in front of you. The frequency of grass cutting, snow clearing. Again, they're levels of service. And I have found over the years, I think when you cut people's levels of service is when you get the angry calls, both to yourselves and through us to our customer service staff. So, I think, again, it's a good point, Councillor Factoriva, in terms of what Burlington's doing. I didn't hear Mayor Marion Mead Ward's comments around the nice to haves and the legislated mandated. But yeah, something we can definitely review, and we're in council's hands. I see both the chair and vice chair nodding, so things we can discuss, as we kind of go through the format for which we present to you. But just a few comments.
Thank you,
Okay.
CEO. You all good? Councilor Patrick, you got
Yeah,
something else?
thank you, Chair Reimer. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mike and Charlotte, both, that's great. In years past, we had budgets with, and this is both, before you guys, we had budgets, with all of the projects, and then a big line, and then it was almost whimsical ones, based on money falling from the sky, things that didn't have a hope and what of ever going forward, but we're on the list to be there because of a special interest group or a concern like that. But no, I agree that I like this approach. And again, it's the wants versus needs discussion is intrinsic on what your personal beliefs are, right? What I think the needs are, right, might be someone else's wants, but we around the horseshoe all know a little bit more because we've got the data to back that up. We know how to connect the dots on how these projects intertwine together. So look forward to that discussion and look forward to passing this recommendation and moving forward. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Patrick. Councilor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Reimer. So first off, I just want to thank our Director of Finance and the entire CLT for their work on this. And Charlotte, I know you did a lot of background research to come up with these recommendations as well. And I think my first look, I didn't understand why we were reaching as far as 2034. I just didn't understand the purpose of that in the policy. But at the end of the day, we can't predict where we'll be in 2034. And the council of the day will make that decision for themselves and for the community and what they're, what's happening at that time and where their debt needs to be. So I'm not really too concerned about it because it's very fluid. I think I just want to follow along a little bit where Councillor Regimo was going. I'd like to see some kind of added piece around review. And I know it will probably come up during budget time. I guess I just want to assure that will happen. And the other piece is around the capital priorities. And I do like this list. I think this is great. It really makes it clear what our priorities are. And through to the CAO, you talk about the legislative mandated obligations, and maybe not to the CAO, maybe to our Director of Finance, whoever wants to take it. Just that alone, that point, and absolutely nothing else in the budget. What is the percentage of that? What is it costing us to do those legal and mandated obligations that we can't take off the table? So where are we starting at the very get-go? That's what I want to hear.
Charlotte, comments on that?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. I mean, it does change each year. So I would say we're still in the process of doing that calculation. I mean, based on my experience over the years, I would say often you're looking at a bare minimum of 3 to 4%. And that's just over regular years, not including what's been happening with inflation. I mean, I guess, so the challenge becomes how you define legislated and mandated, because if there's inflation on legislated and mandated items, we can't change those either. As the CAO was saying, if insurance costs are going up 10-20%, we have to have insurance, and so I would include it in that category. So it's hard for me to give a number, but I would say, yeah, you are definitely looking at a baseline amount just to continue doing what you have been doing based on inflation. And I think inflation so far this year, it's been been tracking at about 3%. They're still looking at that. We've got minimum wage changes that are happening. So we have to take all of those things into consideration.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you. I just thought that was really important to bring that item up, and thank you for that response. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councilor Timmers. Vice Chair Russell.
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair. Through you, just a couple comments. So for the questions about having that yearly review and looking at, again, what those future potential rates might be down the road. It's built into the recommendation already, points 4 and 5. So 4, there is going to be an annual report coming back from staff on our reserves, revenue projections, all of our debt related financial indicators. And then so that is a discussion we will be having on a yearly basis as well, future councils will. And point 5, we do have that ability and flexibility to change percentages as we see emergencies come up. If there are projects that are deemed essential, and for whatever reason the RFP coming back is higher, way higher than projected, we have that flexibility to change that percentage on a project basis, yearly basis, as those things come in. So this isn't set in stone for future councils. It's just with that descending rate, it's really trying to give them flexibility down the road so that if they have major projects coming up as well, that they're not hindered by previous decisions that we have made and as far as our spending now that is going to impact them later. So having that kind of dissension down frees that up a little bit, but we do have the capacity to change it. As far as the comment on how projects are going to be approved and what happens for those, like the goodwill type projects, one of the things, and I think it's going to be coming up in the budget presentation next, is having those 5 priorities and having staff go take a look at those and prioritize and bring it to council. Council members do have that ability to add projects on, just like they probably did in the past, probably prior to 2018, by putting a motion on the table during the budget process, giving their decision or discussion of why they want that project done, either having staff come back with a report or having a vote to put it on. It's one of those things we have that flexibility, but we want to make sure that is decision and that discussion is happening at the table. It's not happening on a one-on-one basis. We want to make sure that if those things do come up, and there are going to be situations where they do, and they do make sense, that again, the decision is made at the table by the majority. So we do have that flexibility as well.
That's good, Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those points. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I very much appreciate the leadership that was shown in the ad hoc committee. 2 on one side, 2 on the other, but coming together for, I think, a very, very robust policy. One of the areas of this policy that I think is, that I believe is very much in our best interest is the fact that through a logical approach such as this, with the framework in place, there is still the flexibility, as the Vice Chair has noted, to address issues. But we're not going to address those issues because of our personal fears or our personal beliefs about risk. We're going to base our decisions on what information is available regarding the world of municipal finance, and that's what's going to direct our decisions. Another element that I think is very, very important is the fact that we have to ensure that everyone has the ability to have input and to have their ideas incorporated. And so as long as the ideas don't fall back on the usual old chestnuts, you may as well, in some cases, get out an eraser and start your budget with that, as opposed to the realization that we already have 3 to 4% that is laid out for us. It's not that we can't fine tune that, and it isn't that we can't find ways to deliver that 3 to 4% differently. That's always available to us. But I've been around long enough now that I've lived through the pain of ideas such as zero-based budgeting, which really doesn't exist because we just found out we're starting the year out with 3 to 4%. We already know that there's going to be a change in minimum wage. The fact that the town of Lincoln proactively approached the living wage in the way that it has will help us not have a huge burden all in one cut on that matter. But these are things that that have been available to us, and I would encourage us. I felt quite encouraged by the fact that with the recommendation that the group was able to bring forward, that if this is our beginning, and it seemed that it was extremely important for us to do a reset, this is a very good place to start. And I would strongly recommend to all of my colleagues that we eliminate any mechanisms at all that fall on our own personal beliefs about how these budgets should be done. We need to stick to the facts. And even if we find ourselves in a situation where we have to stop doing certain things, and I'll use the road. I had no idea that the CAO thought this was such a sacred cow. But as he describes it, the amount of money that we're spending, we can't have every road at a really high percentage of surface, 75 or 80%, but we certainly can't have it at 40%. And this may be the year that in order to provide some flexibility, we're going to have to look at that number and see how we're going to go forward. So again, it's a matter of looking at things a little bit differently and seeing where we can find money within the money that's already available to us. So I'm very satisfied with this report, and I'm particularly satisfied with the conversation, the realization that that we are all taking on in terms of what the future reality is going to look like. The priority setting and 1 and 2 are 2 measurable elements that I believe that's important, and I'm hoping that those standards will be more readily available to us as we go forward with this. So these, I guess, Mr. Chairman, as a question to Charlotte, because I didn't really see this in here, is are we absolutely clear about what those legislative items are? I believe that we had a list that we worked with in last year's budget. Would they have changed very much over this year?
Thank you, Mary. So Charlie, go ahead.
Through you, Chair, to the mayor. I wasn't here for last year's budget, so I might have to turn that to the CAO if he knows what those categories are. I would imagine, there wouldn't be significant changes because we do work within a lot of legislated and mandated limits across the province and in every municipality. But if there's anything to add, I'll let someone else chime in there.
Mr. CAO, comments?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we can definitely provide for council and for anybody else interested what those are. It is a consistent list of things around our obligations. What again, water, some of our engineering and structural obligations, things we do within our recreation centers, cemeteries. There's a number of things that fall into those legislated and mandated responsibilities. So we can definitely make sure council has that incorporated maybe into a future budget presentation. And while I've got the floor, maybe one comment to Councillor Russell's piece about we can absolutely, if an emergency or something unique comes forward, bring that to council. I think it was Councillor Murray that highlighted how she reflects on something like the hospital as an example. And we need to look at one of these once in a generation, once every 50 or 60 years. How long have we been looking at West Lincoln Memorial Hospital as a priority? When you look at a capital expenditure like that, where we're forced by or mandated by levels of government to provide our portion on that, it was very hard to say no when the hospital going forward versus not going forward is dependent on that. So I think, again, to the conversation that happened around the ad hoc committee, and how we need to look at certain projects. A road project is very different than a hospital. Yet when we look at debt or when we look at an expenditure, it really occupies the same space, but it needs to be looked at differently. So I did just want to highlight that in terms of an illustrative example, I think, in what both Councillor Russell and I think Mary Easton were trying to say there.
Thank you, Mike. Mary Easton?
I think that's all that I have to say at the moment. I'm particularly pleased with the logic model that we're using, and I hope that everyone can be comfortable with that so that we can settle down and get this budget done and kept really tight for the benefit of our consumers, for our citizens. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton. Councillor Brunei, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Reimer. I'll try to keep my comments brief. I intentionally stayed back. I was really curious to hear what everyone was going to say tonight. I think there is good balance coming out of this ad hoc committee report. I'm actually, when all the dust settles, I'm actually quite pleased to see some of the things that we're implementing here. But more importantly, that I'm very pleased to hear all the colleagues around the table talking tonight so amicably. And I hope we can continue this pleasantry as we enter the budgets. Because, you know, just talking to Director Graham yesterday, he reminded us, Councillor Mikulik and I in our session, you know, that we deferred a number of projects. So, you know, projects are increasing in costs, and we've already got a number of things coming down the pipe in Lincoln Avenue and Durham Road. The region has Ontario Street and Regional Road 81. So I know Director Graham already indicated that he's hoping that, you know, construction costs don't come up, that we can afford the stuff we've already approved in the budget last year. So I think this is going to be an interesting budget, and I hope we can have some respectful conversation when we get to those tables. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brunei. Councillor Mikulik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Reimer, for the opportunity to speak again. So in looking in just a follow-up, in looking on, you know, chart 10 of the presentation, you know, I was inquiring about the 48% development charges and the concern about, you know, the possibility of that not being what it turns out to be. There's another, the 32% tax levy to fund this. Is there any assumption made on increases to the tax levy? Or is that based on a 0% tax levy ask?
Charlotte, you want to answer that?
Yep, through you, Chair, to the councillor. There is an assumption of increasing revenues. There's a slide later on when I said it's anywhere in the range of 6 to 8% per year, although I would add that that includes growth. So it's, you know, based on looking at the last few years, the rate revenue tends to be growing at. What we know from our studies, including our rate study, and then, you know, assumptions about growth. And so the forecast does assume an increasing revenue level in the future.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Just a clarifying question. So like an increasing revenue by way of increasing the levy? Yes,
well, so own source revenues. So the debt limit, that graph that we looked at that showed it around 11%, that's based on the assumption that own source revenues, which would include user fees, water and wastewater rates, and the tax levy, would grow at a rate of on average 6 to 8%, but that includes growth. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the tax levy would increase at that percentage, but it means we're making the assumption that based on historicals, the revenues would continue to increase at approximately that percentage.
Okay,
Councillor?
so thank you. So just just to clarify, last year we experienced a high level of growth at 3%. And this year we're you're estimating our levy increase to be approximately 3 to 4% before growth.
Well, I don't have the growth number at this point in time because we are still getting final numbers from MPAC. So we don't usually know our final growth number until closer to November in the year. But the graph is making that assumption that revenues will continue to increase. And this is based on, like I said, what we know of not just tax levy, because there are also our user fees, our water and sanitary sewer rates, as well as the tax levy.
Council?
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell. Committee receive and file report AD-08-23 regarding the ad hoc capital financing debt review committee recommendations and approve the total debt limit as follows. From 2023 to 2028, 15% of own source revenues. From 2029 to 2033, 12% of own source revenues. From 2034 onward, 10% of own source revenues. Tax levy and rate supported debt limit not to exceed 10% of own source revenues. And direct staff to prepare a debt and capital financing policy, including the updated debt limit as per above, establishing a target for obligatory reserve supported debt, for example, development charge or parkland dedication cash in lieu, not to exceed 50% of the 5-year average of obligatory reserve collections adjusted for anomalies. Requiring that staff complete an annual report to council on proposed debt, long-term borrowing and revenue projections, reserve balances, debt-related financial indicators, timing of work and debt issuance as part of the budget process. Specifying that should any proposed projects or overall proposed yearly budget push the town of Lincoln above the aforementioned limits, that a report first be brought to council for a decision to see the impact prior to any project approval. And lastly, to direct staff to prepare the 2024 capital budget and 10-year plan based on the following priorities, the first two being the highest priorities. Number 1 is health and safety. Number 2, legislated mandated legal obligations, asset obligations. Number 3, strategic growth related investment. Number 4, council priorities, overall health community lens. And number 5, grant opportunities and partnerships. Madam Clerk, would you please open the vote?
Thank you. We will be voting by hand today. If members of council are in favor, please raise your hand clearly in your screen so that I can see that, and please hold it. And thank you. And all those opposed, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Julie. We're now considering item 7.2, which is a presentation provided by our treasurer regarding 2024 budget introduction. Prior to the presentation, the CEO would like to provide introductory remarks. Mike, please go ahead.
I think he is. Oh, there he is.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
He's had a long day.
I was just warming up my tea that I didn't get a chance to drink. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think I made up most of my comments when I kicked off the first presentation. I did try to connect the two. I thought it was important to speak about them together because they're intrinsically connected. So I will wait and see if council has any questions following the presentation. And I will let Charlotte take you through the various pieces of it. I know there's an educational video in there, as well as some more, I think, key drivers and challenges that we face. Again, no different than I think we're experiencing in other years, but this is the kickoff to the 2024 budget process. So look forward to councillors' questions.
Thank you, Mike. Julie, please go ahead. Oh, sorry, Charlotte. I was searching and I was
okay.
looking at Julie. Charlotte, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to start with the video just because with my screen sharing, I think it'll be easiest if I do the video first and then I turn over to the presentation. So just give me 1 second. So that we're just going to start out with a video that's available on our website, and it talks a little bit about how the town budget works.
Okay, I'd like to help you understand how your town develops its budget. We always hear about them, and often this can feel like another language altogether. Before we get started, there is important information you should know. Ontario towns like Lincoln receive only 9% of all taxes collected, but are responsible for over 50% of the infrastructure. Let's start by looking at what the word budget means. Simply put, it's a planned, itemized summary of money that is coming into the town and how that money is spent for a specific period of time. It's very important to note that provincial government legislation in Ontario states money coming in equals money going out, also known as revenue equals expenditures, or a balanced budget. The town of Lincoln provides more than 90 services to the citizens of Lincoln, so town council and administration always have to make difficult decisions to ensure this balancing takes place. There are two main components of the budget when looking at the money going out side of the scale. Operating pays for all the day-to-day activities of the town. This includes items such as salaries and wages, utilities, supplies, fuel, and insurance, just to name a few. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the town's control. So let's focus on how the town collects to pay for all these services. For every dollar that comes into the town, 66 cents comes from property taxes, 2 cents from grants and subsidies, and 32 cents from user fees and other sources. So now we've learned what a budget is, how cities collect money, and how they spend it. Now let's take a look at how these pieces work together. Money comes in through property taxes, grants and subsidies, and user fees. The money collected is required for both the operating and capital budget. We've already talked about the operating budget, including day-to-day expenses, but it also includes money for funding capital budgets. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or rehabilitation of current assets under the town's control. This connection is made through three methods. The capital levy method reflects a pay-as-you-go approach. The reserve fund method, which reflects a planned save now, acquire or use later approach, and the debt payment approach, which represents borrowing. The way the town balances its budget is it adds up all the costs to deliver services, then subtracts all non-tax revenues such as user fees and charges, grants, and interest earnings. The difference is the amount required from property taxes to equal a balanced budget. Okay, so let's recap. 1. A budget is a plan for money coming in and money going out. There are two building blocks to the town budget, operating and capital. 2. The operating budget is like you paying your house bills to keep the lights on. Just like in a normal household, our bills go up with inflation and other economic pressures. 3. The capital budget is like your major outlays, vehicles, house, renovations, etc. 4. Money comes in from three sources: property tax levy, user fees, and grants and subsidies. 5. Money coming in is used to deliver over 90 services to town residents. 6. Town council and administration, with the input of the public, decide how to best balance the town budget guided by provincial legislation. And that is how your town develops its budget.
Okay, and then if you just give me a minute, I will pull up my presentation, which is going to say a lot of the same things, that we just talked about, a lot of the same things that that video talked about. But I think it's a really important discussion for the public to hear as well, and just to understand exactly how the budget works in the town. All right, we can see my presentation. So what are we going to discuss then this evening? We've just done an introductory video on how the town budget works. We're going to do a little bit of an overview of the budget process. We'll talk about the budget schedule for the 2024 budget, and then we'll talk about next steps. So as an overview of the budget process, municipal budgets are prepared by staff and approved by council. Some of the key features of a budget include defining levels of service and the fine balance between maintaining and improving services, facilities, and infrastructure, while respectfully managing taxpayer dollars. It helps us prioritize programs and services, provide a means to accomplish council's strategic goals and priorities, and ensuring that financial resources are available to meet health and safety and legislative requirements. The audience is not just council members, but our stakeholders and residents throughout Lincoln. The Municipal Act does not allow municipalities to operate on a deficit basis or to take out debt to fund ongoing operations. Debt can be taken out for major capital projects. This is referred to as a balanced budget, which means revenues equal expenditures. Lincoln's budgets, like most other municipal budgets, are prepared on a modified accrual basis, which is similar to a cash basis. I actually really prefer to call it a cash basis because I think it's easier for people to understand, with a few modifications. This is designed to ensure that money coming in equals money going out. So in the example that I gave earlier with Councillor Mikulik, we budget for principal payments on debt as an expense in our budget. Businesses who are used to seeing balance sheets and income statements, they would not think of principal payments on debt as an expense. They would think of it as a reduction of the loan. So that's an example. We always budget to try to make sure that the cash we collect in a year is enough to cover all the cash that we need to pay out in a year. Building a budget is like the balancing act our residents do with their own household budgets. We weigh needs versus available funds, or as the CAO was saying earlier, we weigh our different levels of needs, our different need priorities, and we also consider the affordability and the cost to the taxpayer. This applies to operating and capital, but it's especially true for our 10-year capital forecast. So on the right side of the slide, you can see a parallel between a municipal budget and a household budget. And it's interesting because I do often think it's good to explain budgeting concepts to people in a way they understand in terms of their household budget. But I do also want to say that it's important to understand that municipal budgets have some differences from household budgets as well. We have major capital construction costs that we're covering. We have legislated responsibilities, which we'll talk about later. And so I would say there are some similarities and some differences. But some of the similarities are that a municipality has to plan for maintenance and services like utilities, repairs, supplies, and insurance. A household has their monthly bills. The municipality has to plan for asset management, roads, infrastructure, parks, facilities, and fleet. And a household has to plan for their major repairs like roof, windows, and furnace. We also plan for the future. We think about whether we're going to have more residents, more businesses. How do we modernize our service delivery? And households also plan for the future. If they're looking at having a bigger family or they want a different house, RESPs, and planning for retirement. Where do property taxes go? I think that this pie chart is a very important pie chart for people to understand. In Lincoln, we collect property taxes. Of the property taxes that we collect, 52% we collect on behalf of the region and we pay to the region. And then the region uses it to do all their services, transit, waste management, police, regional roads, all of the services that they provide. 11% we collect on behalf of the school boards and we pay to the school boards. And then the town of Lincoln keeps 37% of the tax bill. So for the average residential property in 2023, that was about $1,900. We keep that money and we take that $1,900 a year on average for the house, and we use it to provide over 90 programs and services. And you can see the Loonie breakdown here, all of the things that those property tax dollars go towards. planning and municipal law enforcement, fire rescue services, agencies, boards, and commissions like the library, capital levy and special infrastructure levy, legislative, administrative, and general government, economic development and communications, public works, roads, and infrastructure, and parks, facilities, recreation, and culture. I think council has seen this slide more than one time before. This is an overview of our budget process, and there are 6 phases. That's how we like to think of it, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more depth. Phase 1 of our budget process is prepare. In phase 1, the budget schedule is prepared. Departments review services and provide estimated costs based on service levels established by council. So we've been hearing from council. We hear from council in the meetings, we hear from council in their strategic prioritization, and we take those priorities along with all of the other responsibilities that we have, the legislated requirements that we talked about, and then we use those to start preparing the budget. Town staff monitor trends. We look at broader statistics, financial projections, inflation rates, and growth projections. And then capital budgets are prepared for anticipated projects based on asset management planning and needs that arise. Sometimes there are things we don't anticipate, but for the most part, we have a forecast that we use to help plan for the capital. So what are the budget key drivers? I think it is an important thing to talk about the fact that there are many things in the budget that are outside of our control. All of these factors come into play, and they help to drive the budget or tell us what it is that we have to include in the budget. So we have growth. We have changes in legislation that comes from the province related to development charges. We might have new residents and we have to provide services for them. We might have new revenues that we're generating because of growth. We have service delivery that we consider. What are the service level standards that we want to maintain? What has council said to us? What has the public said in terms of the services that they want? We look at technology and trends. How do we manage risks? How do we ensure security? How do we provide services in a way that's most efficient and effective? We look at our capital infrastructure, and we've talked about it a little bit, but we'll be talking about it a lot in the future. We've had massive increases in construction prices, and that's a big driver for the budget. We look at inflation. We look at grant funding. So sometimes if we receive a grant that we haven't had before, that helps offset costs. Or if we receive a grant for a capital project, it might impact the timing of when we want to do that project because we want to do it at a better cost and take advantage of the grant. We also have drivers in Lincoln, such as the hospitals we just talked about a little bit earlier, the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital and the contribution that the town has committed towards that. We have compensation costs, changes in minimum wage levels, changes to Canada Pension Plan and EI rates, WSIB, EHT, all of those things, they impact our compensation costs. We have existing and projected community improvement plan agreements. So we have some things that have been agreed to and committed to dating us back as far as 2014, and then we have those costs to carry out and they impact the budget. We have fixed and variable costs. So some things don't change no matter what happens with our revenues. We have those steady costs. And then we also have variable costs that change based on what we're doing and what we need. We have a lot of legal and regulatory requirements. So we did talk about those, but I had made myself a short list. I can't see the CLT members on the slide, but I did try to touch a few. You know, we have records management costs. We have bunker gear. We have minimum maintenance services for roads. We have facility conditions that we have to maintain. We have development charge legislation, water, health and safety requirements, cemetery requirements. So all of the things that we're all planning for and budgeting for, we have regulatory and legislative requirements that feed into those budgets. And then we have cash flow issues and timing. So we discussed that our budget is mostly on a cash basis. And so we have to plan for all that money, making sure that the amount that we collect equals the amount that we go out so that we meet all of the regulations in the Municipal Act. Phase 2 of our budget process is to engage. We have a budget survey to understand community priorities and knowledge of the budget process. We have a dedicated page on speakuplincoln.ca to engage and inform. So our budget is out. I'm very excited, or our budget survey is out. I'm very excited about it. I really enjoyed reading some of the comments from the prior year, and I'm really looking forward to what everyone has to say, and I'm sure council is as well. It's interesting to hear what the public has to say to us, and we're very interested in that. We have a social media campaign to promote the survey and inform and educate the public. And we have a print outreach, including newsletters delivered to households and print ads in a local newspaper. So that budget survey is on the Speak Up Lincoln website, I believe. And we also have some print copies that are available in some of our facilities so that if anyone wants to fill it out on paper, they can do so. Phase 3 of our budget process is to develop. So staff take all of those pieces of information and they continue to develop the budget, including the stakeholder engagement. Many services, as I keep mentioning, have regulatory and legislative requirements, rate studies, or master plans. All of those things help inform the budget process. Some costs are based on decisions made in previous years, as we discussed, such as the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital or the community improvement plans. Phase 4 of the budget is to consolidate. So once all of those have been completed, the budgets are compiled and reviewed by the finance department, and the consolidated budget is reviewed by the corporate leadership team. The budget has two main components, the operating budget and the capital budget. They're related because the capital levy and the transfers to reserve funds in the operating budget help fund the projects in the capital budget. The budget book is prepared and provided to council with notes regarding significant changes and requests. Capital projects will include a description, justification, and funding sources, and staff will also include some visual aids such as maps and pictures. Phase 5 of the budget process, which we had a little glimpse of already today, is to inform, debate, and approve. The 2024 budget book will be provided to council in advance of the meetings to allow time for review and consideration. Budget committee meetings are held, and committee may make changes to budgets based on different service level expectations or funding sources. Council deliberates and approves the budget, which determines the property tax rate for the year. And finally, once the budget's approved, we move into phase 6, which is educate. We ensure proper communication to the broader community on the decisions and strategic investments made by council. We use all available means to communicate to the community, and a budget report executive summary helps to inform residents and businesses. So I wanted to highlight in this slide as well. I mean, we talked about some of the prioritization themes for the capital budget, but what are some of the guiding principles that we use for our budget process? I took some of what I've seen here and elsewhere, and then I grouped it under council's strategic priority heading so we could think about it in those terms. So the strategic priority to have a welcoming and connected community. We meet that priority by ensuring our budget is informed by our community stakeholders and by engaging them. We invest in community spaces and connectivity through the town's transportation network. We deliver the high quality services that residents have come to expect. We have the strategic priority to be a vibrant and prosperous community. We focus our decisions on results and outcomes. We recognize that affordability and quality of life are both important to our residents and businesses. We challenge ourselves to deliver high quality programs and services while considering the financial impact on property taxes. And we support our business stakeholders. And the third strategic priority is to be a responsible and resilient community. We consider the long-term implications on all decisions. We build in flexibility and contingencies for emerging priorities and opportunities. We promote program efficiency and effectiveness, and we find efficiencies through modernization, shared services, innovation, and strategic purchasing. This is the proposed budget schedule for the 2024 budget. Phase 1 has been ongoing for months already. Phase 2, where we engage, is from August to September of 2023. And as I said, the budget is, or the survey is out for people to fill out. Phase 3, where we develop, is occurring from August to October of 2023. Phase 4, consolidate, will be from October to November of 2023. Phase 5, to inform, debate, and approve, is scheduled for November and December of this year. And then after council ratifies the budget in December, phase 6 would be to educate the public starting in January of 2024. Are there any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Charlotte and Mike, for that. Council, questions, comments? Councillor Patriota, please go ahead.
Well, thanks, Chair Reimer, and Charlotte, thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was fantastic. Is there any way that you can share that video, which was awesome, so we can share it on our own social medias, right? So the more the merrier, and get that message out there. I mean, it was brilliant.
I see Liliana nodding too.
Okay, terrific.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Oh, Liliana, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, Councillor, to the chair, or through you, Chair, to the councillor. I think we can share those on our social media accounts too. I think that I was looking at the video at the beginning, and I was thinking that let's put that out to the community sooner than later. It is live on our Speak Up Lincoln page, but why not share it through our social media accounts? So we'll do that promptly, and we can share the link with council as well for you to share through your channels.
Okay, and I think Councillor Brene and myself should show it next Tuesday night. So thanks, Chair Reimer.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks, Liliana. Vice Chair Russell, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Charlotte or to Mike. In phase 4 and phase 5, I see a bit of duplication. I'm just trying to figure out which is which. It says in phase 4, the budget book is prepared and provided to council with notes regarding significant changes and requests. And then again in phase 5, the budget book will be provided to council in advance of the meetings to allow time. Can you just give some insight into what the differentiation is between those two steps?
Charlotte?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the councillor. I think the difference there in my mind as I was mapping out the process in phase 4 is when we compile the budget and we make the notes for council. In phase 5, what I was trying to highlight is the fact that council will have that budget book in advance of the meetings to have time to really review it and give it consideration. So I was just sort of trying to highlight the fact that as part of the inform, debate, and approve, council is given that time in advance, but from us internally as staff, we're compiling and finalizing that budget in phase 4.
Okay, thank you. And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, VC.
Back to that phase 4 portion where it says significant changes and requests. What would the changes and requests be? Is that based on staff review and discussion and financial parameters, or can you get some more insight into that?
Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, yes. Essentially, I usually do look and we highlight major changes, major requests. Usually they are still based on all of those things we just talked about. They're based on legislated changes. They're based on strategic priorities of council. They're based on feedback that we're hearing from stakeholders and from the public. So I can't give you a list of what those things would be right now because we are still in that phase where we're building the budget. But in the book, I will be highlighting some of those significant changes, and staff will be working towards providing more information to council on those things.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. The first one is either for, it's probably for Charlotte and the CAO, and that is how is the provincial government policy trending in terms of grant support to municipalities? Do we have any sense of that?
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Through you, Mayor, or through you, Chair, to the Mayor. I'm not sure if the CAO has insight in terms of trends. I know for myself, I've been looking at some things like Ontario Community Infrastructure Funding, which for Lincoln decreased the last time that the grant was announced, and it has to do with them changing the way they're doing their funding allocation formula. So I'm very hopeful that when the next round comes out, we'll be getting an increase in that funding, but we don't know yet. So I don't have any other specific information on the grants. I'm not sure whether the CAO has any indication on that.
Mr. CEO, insights?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we keep hearing from the provincial government, albeit they did say at AMO they're waiting for the federal government to develop an infrastructure program. I did hear very recently that there should be something being announced by the province that speaks to infrastructure specifically. And so, you know, I don't know if that's necessarily a trend, but, you know, I would suggest that I think investment in infrastructure will be critical. I've said on a few occasions when Bill 23 came forward and when the province said they're going to figure out how to make us whole, I'm still waiting for that, figure out how to make us whole to come to fruition. And so, you know, I would hope to see more investment in infrastructure and a program that lays that out. Mr. Chair, through you to Mayor Easton.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my second question is in relation to the conversations that have been going on, that were going on between Marion Mead Ward, the Mayor of Burlington, and Premier Ford, related specifically to getting building going, because certainly the issue of, you know, how our development charges will continue to flow into the municipality is something that we certainly should be concerned about. And so I've been thinking about this quite a bit and looking to see if there's anything being written about this. It almost seems as if our hands are tied in terms of what options are open to municipalities to get that building going. We're not the ones that take out the building applications. We don't fill those out. That's up to the developer. But are there any options realistically? And if there are not, how should we consider this in terms of our overall approach to the budget?
Charlotte?
Thank you, through you, Chair, to the Mayor. That's a big question. I think, as the CAO said, I too am waiting to hear what making us whole means in terms of the changes. And there are still parts of the financial impacts of the legislation that we don't fully know what it's going to be yet. And so I think that is a challenge. I would say the best thing that we can do in terms of budgeting is to plan for that for now. I mean, we can only plan based on what we know. I don't really think we can plan based on what we hope for necessarily. I think we have to take what we know, do our best to plan for the future, and just continue to ask them, like the government, to help with that part. In terms of the developers, that may be a question to turn over to Mr. Bruder or to the CAO, but I think in terms of the government, I certainly am hoping that they'll give us a bit more information on that soon.
Okay, in connection to that question, Mr. CAO, I'm expecting you to jump in here. And so would you please consider the issue of whether or not municipalities can begin to charge carrying costs to developers, because these developments just don't sit completely fallow. There's always something going on, somebody to meet with, some activity to take place. Will we be in a position to start charging carrying costs?
Go ahead, Mike.
Through Mr. Chair to the Mayor. I mean, it's definitely something I'd explore. I don't think there is a legislative framework that allows us to do that. Now, some of our approvals are time limited. And I think that's potentially where, you know, we continue to have a little bit of a stick and carrot approach that we may be able to take. I think there's issues well beyond just the town of Lincoln that are much more national or international or global at play in terms of economies that dictate how fast developments move, especially in an environment like we're hearing now. But is it, you know, are we all hearing those same issues or challenges that those who own properties are holding on to those properties and not necessarily actively servicing and or building development? Yes. Does that come at a cost or a challenge for municipalities? I would say yes. What can we do in those situations to encourage building to occur once approvals are granted? Like I said, there are some time limits, and Mr. Bruder can speak to those. And oftentimes we've had developers come before this council to suggest they want an extension to time into those durations. I think we can continue to look at those sorts of things. Can we tighten some of those timelines? I don't know how they're prescribed in the Planning Act. So again, Mr. Bruder can speak to that. But I don't believe there's anything right now that allows us to put any sort of financial restrictions or financial obligations to property owners if they're holding on to property. But I understand where, you know, where you're at, Mary Easton, in terms of there is a cost to us holding these things, to going through processes, and then those being sat on. And so how do we encourage those things to move forward? So again, I don't know if Mr. Bruder wants to chime in on the timeline piece.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Not too much more to add to what Mike already stated. Just generally speaking to when we look at some of the costs to us, those are some costs, even as we do go through these planning applications, these processes with expedited timelines, we've been looking at what it takes to get through those. At least some of that, you know, we looked at our planning application fees, for example, as everybody recalls, looking at making some adjustments there and how we deal with those. But generally speaking, yeah, you have to be a little bit careful too on what you do in some of these instances, because if you're, you know, levying some carrying costs or whatnot on the developer, ultimately that, you know, gets built into their pro forma, how much it costs for them to deliver a project in the end. There's always the risk that something like that could be passed on to a future homeowner as well. But either way, as Mike stated, there isn't really any legislation that I know of currently that allows us to introduce something like that. So it'd be a relatively new idea and concept. But again, we are in interesting times. So, you know, I'll continue to keep my ear to the ground, but not something I've heard about around my circles, at least.
Okay.
Thanks, Director Bruder.
Thanks very
Mary,
much, everyone. That's certainly something to keep our eyes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Easton. Councillor Mikulik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Reimer, through you to our CEO or to Charlotte. Just we're at the initial phase. We're at the initial beginning, you know, starting point for these budget deliberations and these budget discussions between yourself and staff. Do we, how does staff come up with the amounts that they come up with? Are they given direction as to how much they're allowed to, or how much they're targeted to, you know, spend in a given year? I'm just curious, you know, because what I'm hearing is affordability, right? Like I'm hearing that on the street about, you know, residents having, you know, affordability. Inflation is X amount. Cost of living is this amount, right? Like my raises, I'm not getting the same raises that are keeping up with inflation and that sort of thing. So the question I have is, like, what direction is staff given when they're presenting the asks to yourself, and what sort of guidance are they given as far as what is an affordable amount that's palatable to the taxpayer?
Mr. CEO.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, a complex question that that I will try to unpack for you, councillor. I would suggest, you know, anytime we're starting with budget, I understand, as well as the entire corporate leadership team, where council's at, where our community's at. I don't think anybody is blind to the challenges being faced out there. If we actually look at, for example, the cost of groceries, and we hear all the negativity or the pessimism or all that goes into it, we understand that just like everyone else does. We actually begin by looking at the services and what it costs to deliver those services. In a lot of ways, it's a line by line exercise that we go through. I can tell you that the direction, for lack of a better word, because I get asked that by members of the corporate leadership team in terms of where we need to be, is often one that is incredibly low. This year I've said, 2%. Now, I think as you heard Charlotte say, as you've heard me say, when we look at things like the insurance, when we look at things like WSIB, when we look at things like collective agreements, and I know some will say, well, you don't need to look at those. As I said to you, I can't not have insurance. I can't not look at provincial legislation around the increase to minimum wage. Those are things I have to then figure out how to do. So either service goes down or those things are passed forward as they are in your groceries and your gas and everything else. So I would suggest to you, I think the direction I've given in terms of affordability, because I hear council loud and clear, is 2%. You add 2% on top of the fact that we're starting at 3 to 4% with these things that I can't control is where we come to. I think council, as you've heard me say numerous times again, you're only responsible for 37% of the tax bill. So a 6% or a 5% or a 4% tax increase is actually 1% on the whole, if you look at taking a third of it. So, that again, it becomes complex in a two-tier system, and we're only responsible for our own, but our own is only responsible for the third of your tax bill. So this goes up by whatever percentage, but that only equates to so much on the entire tax bill. Now, again, that's probably in more depth than you probably wanted, Councillor, but I would tell you it's a very deliberate and considerate exercise where we look at last year's costs and we look at what we can do as a result of where things are at and what we're hearing and what we're hearing people are experiencing in the community. I could go on, but I'm hoping that answers most of your question.
I see Charlotte's hand up. Yeah, go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you, through you, Chair. The only thing I wanted to just add to that is, and then we're looking at the capital. So, I mean, we've had the ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee was having conversations about how those prioritization themes work. What does that mean? So if we want to keep the debt at a lower level, then we have to really look at what is the amount that we're contributing each year? What is the amount of the capital levy? What is the asset management plan telling us in terms of what we need to be contributing each year? And so part of the challenge with that as well is, I would say, even though people like to talk a lot about percentage increases in terms of the capital budget, we have construction costs and capital requirements that we have to look at, and we have to plan for the long term. And so usually that comes a little later in the process where, like the CAO said, people have been going line by line. They're looking at all those things. They're working on their capital budgets. We now have the direction from council in terms of the prioritization theme. So then we can look at the capital plan and work on mapping that. And then we have to kind of look at what does that all tell us, and make sure that we're contributing enough onto the capital program each year as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Mike. Councillor Mecklen?
I think it's an important question to ask, especially when we're hearing about needs and wants and that scale of needs and wants. And I look at other municipalities, and I drive through other municipalities, and I drive on their roads, and some of their roads, they're among the worst in Ontario. And I'm wondering why those municipalities have those terrible roads. And is it because they're not willing to spend what they need to spend? They can't spend what they need to spend. So I'm just asking that question. Just when it comes to needs and wants, like there's a sliding scale of needs and what we think or what one person thinks is a need relative to what others might perceive as a need. So that's why I asked that question. And again, like affordability, it's especially when you have seniors living within our community, they're not getting those increases in salaries or those raises that seem to be important nowadays. So that's why I bring that forward, that issue with that point forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Michalek. Councilor Brunet, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So I put my hand up a little while ago. I'm glad the mayor, I was going to ask about, through your chair, I was going to ask Charlotte the same question about, when is the province going to make us whole? So I'm glad the mayor asked that question. So my second point was going to be exactly what Councilor Michalek just brought up. I was actually kind of taken back when the CAO spoke about needs and wants. But since he's actually mentioned it, I've been trying to reflect on it for the last 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm wondering, based on what he's been saying tonight, because I haven't heard the CEO talk about some of the things he's talking about as much as I've heard him talk tonight. And I'm actually reflecting on maybe what he really means by needs and wants. And, we are experiencing, some difficult times, and people are experiencing a lot of pressures. So I'm wondering, Chair Reimer, I'm wondering if the CEO can just kind of confirm for me and maybe for others that we're kind of a little bit taken back by his comments that really what you mean is, a need might be something like being able to put food on your table and have good, clean drinking water and have a roof over your head versus not having potholes in a road. I'm just wondering if you could clarify on that on CO, because I think it's an interesting point, and one which I've always talked about needs and wants, but I'm looking at it differently after your comments. I'm wondering if you could expand.
Mr. CEO, please go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Councillor Brunet asking that question and me providing a chance, I think, to expand on what I said. And I think I characterized it more as, I think we often meld these two together. I think I called it a little bit of a misnomer, because I think when I think of needs and when we think of those basic needs, they are, as the councillor highlighted, keeping the heat on, making sure people have clean water, making sure those basic necessities are met. I think, and that's why I said, I think there's a gradient or a spectrum of other needs that are important, that are those cutting grass, filling potholes, making sure snow is cleared. And to Councillor Michalek's comment, when you look from municipality to municipality, those service levels are set at very different levels. And so I think if we find ourselves in economic difficulties more globally, and that's starting to impact our residents, and we look at service levels, that's where we can have a little bit of flexibility. I think it's just, from my perspective, I think it's an overly simplistic view to just say it's a need versus a want and put them in those two buckets. That needs versus wants is a lot more integrated. And so, you think about community events as an example. I think a lot would put that in if I was oversimplifying it, in the want bucket. But a community event sometimes brings people together. It shows that camaraderie. We see the passion people have when we have certain events in the community and how they love coming together. I've always said it's those sorts of things that create community. We provide services, but we're also there to create and build community. And so again, I think as we look at those challenges, and I'm not by any means suggesting we should be cutting in a particular area. I just think those are the challenges that we face when we're looking at it. It's a complex topic. And I think everything that you've got in front of you, I would characterize as a degree of need. Now, again, one would say, doing this event, that may not be a need if I can't put food on the table. And I would wholeheartedly agree with you. But when we talk to people about the things they remember, it is not how we clean their snow oftentimes. It's the event or the park or the reading at the library that they have that they actually cared about. Or you were able to provide a swim program so I could go to work, or a camp program in the summer so I could go to that part-time job and still find a way to make sure my kids got that exposure and that socialization. So yeah, again, I think it's a complex topic that, as you can see, I'm probably very passionate about, and in terms of the role that municipalities play in people's day-to-day lives, beyond just the basic necessities of survival. And so I appreciate the councillor's question, and I think the opportunity to expand on it.
Thank you, Mike. Councilor Brunei?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Reimer. I just had one other comment and maybe a follow-up question. So yesterday, when Councillor Mickenrock and I sat with Director McKay and Director Graham, we were reflecting on how successful staff has been on bringing in grants and funding that we received. And I made a comment, I wonder where we would be had we not been so successful on those grants. You know, when you look at the EV charging stations, Lakeshore Road, the rubberization, we could go on and on and on and on. I asked a question specifically to Shannon because I was reflecting on the Roma conference and a delegation where we were asking for funding on the Rittenhouse, the Moses Rittenhouse Library in Vineland. And I'm not sure whether I hadn't heard it or whether I forgot, but apparently we were not successful on that grant. And like I say, it was off my radar. So I'm wondering through you, Chair, through you to Charlotte, if it would be possible as we go into budget to kind of get a summary on funding requests and grant requests that we have out, and maybe just, you know, show us a list of where they are, whether we have been told it's still coming, a request is still being looked at, or whether we've been denied. Just like a summary on that, so we really have an idea of possible requests and funding in the pipeline.
Charlotte, is that something you can comment on?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, yes, I think that's something we can absolutely work on for you. It might take a little bit of time to put it together, but I think it's definitely worthwhile, and it's something to celebrate and look at, and something I'm sure we would be happy to put together for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Councilor Brunei. There be no further discussion. I have a motion moved by Councilor Pachariva that we receive and file for information report AD-09-23 and associated presentation regarding the 2024 budget introduction, phase 1. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Thank you. And all of those in favor, please raise your hand clearly. And thank you. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And Chair, that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. On our agenda, number 8, confidential items. We have no further confidential items this evening. Committee remarks. Does anybody have any remarks this evening from committee? I would like to take a minute just to thank Mayor Easton, thank Councillor Murray, Vice Chair Russell, all the staff involved in the ad hoc committee. The mayor mentioned in a previous committee meeting that the format, the ad hoc committee, I think allowed for some honest and insightful conversation, only possible, I guess, through that format. And I'm thankful for those conversations, and they had a huge impact on this evening's report and related motions. So I just want to thank again everyone involved in that. So, seeing no other remarks from committee, no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 8:01 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Not everyone.